We're doing it. Hello, good afternoon, and happy Friday. Thank you so much for tuning in today on a really, really important topic that has been really making its rounds in the cannabis industry and really should be making its rounds everywhere, in my humble opinion. And that's accessibility for websites. This is something that is we're going to get into the nuances of the language in a little bit, but we could say requirement for purposes of this introduction. Businesses of all sizes are required to meet this standard for accessibility. And again, that's another tricky phrase we're going to talk about in a second. But what we're seeing a lot of is we are seeing legal action being taken against companies that are not up to standard or accepted standards. And this is becoming, let's say, I wouldn't say problematic, but it's getting a lot of attention because of this. And this has really brought especially small businesses into hyper-focus because, as we'll talk about, there's this misconception that small businesses will not be affected by something that they're not going to be affected. Small businesses will not be affected by accessibility requirements because, no one's going to find me. And that's actually the complete opposite is true, as it is in a lot of cases like this. So we wanted to hop on LinkedIn today and talk a little bit about what exactly is going on here. This is getting more and more attention. More than 200 lawsuits alone were filed in the state of New York in September across the board, across all industries about accessibility. And I invited on today Sam Nardelli. She is the co-owner and creative director of Shanty Design. She's a long time partner of ours, and we have such pleasure to bring her on today to talk about this important subject. And we worked with her closely with clients on accessibility requirements, and she's just the right person to have this conversation. So, Sam, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Looking forward to the chat.
Absolutely. So let's start with some basics, right? So what does accessibility even mean, right? Is there a definition for it? Is this something that a standard that you have to meet? Is there a checklist anywhere? What is it? What does that mean?
So so accessibility in general for websites, there are a set of guidelines put together by W3.org, which is like the organization that basically controls all of the internet. And those guidelines are WCAG, Website Content Accessibility Guidelines. And I think the important thing to note is there's not technically a legal requirement for compliance. It's more conformance because it's still very nuanced. Like there's still a lot of conversation happening between web experts and even just the ADA. Like there are some laws that are in place and new sections that have been added that kind of continue to complicate everything. But with websites, the main goal is you want users with disabilities to be able to use your website. And the good thing about accessibility is you cater to, people with vision impairment and like other ailments. It makes it easier for everybody. So, like you make sure that your contrast is good. Anyone is going to have a better time using your website. So, yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Whoops, we're live, people. When we're talking about accessibility, it's not just visual impairment. It extends to really anybody with a physical disability, right? So there's a couple of different standards to meet. Like, for example, like you can have a physical disability and need like a modified keyboard or a mouse. Like for someone who might not have the dexterity to click on a certain element, for example, or you're also talking about somebody who there's also language standards, right? Talking to somebody on it's called the Fleisch ease of reading, and that's some SEO value to that as well. But it's about speaking to people on a level that they understand as well, like using simpler language. So there's and that's not a disability thing; that's accessibility across the board. So there's a lot of elements that play into this, and I think one of the things that tends to be not sort of a safety net that people think they have is, well, nobody's going to find me, right? Or I only serve my community. Like I'm a dispensary that only operates in a certain state, or I am a business that only serves a certain, I'm a cannabis business that only serves other cannabis folks. And that might lull people into a sense of like comfort, right? They might think that they're in the clear, but we're actually finding out that it's kind of the opposite, right? So bottom line is no business is too small for accessibility conformance. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like what are we seeing?
Like for conformance, you mean? Like
yeah, what are we seeing in terms of the businesses being targeted, right? It's not the Fortune 500 necessarily.
Sure, yeah.
Right? It's the folks in our neighborhood.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And I mean, there are definitely big companies that are getting, eyes on them too. Like a good example that I'll say is like Domino's. They were actually sued because someone couldn't order a pizza on there. Someone with a disability couldn't order a pizza. And that made it harder for them to just like be able to use. It's like anyone who, like the public domain, if the general public is able to use your website, no matter where you're located, you want to make sure that it's available for every type of user.
Absolutely. And we are in a place also where language is very important, right? And we're using the term conformance and not compliance. Why are we saying conformance? Why are we not saying compliance?
So conformance means that you are striving to be accessible, and it's voluntary. Like you want to do your best. You want to cater to all of your customers and clients. Whereas compliance that's where it gets a little bit weird because there's, like I had mentioned, those sections and the legal requirements from the ADA, they don't necessarily spell out the technical requirements of being accessible. So like compliance isn't necessarily the goal. I think the industry is moving in that direction. I think eventually there will be a set of guidelines, like the WCAG, like that's kind of the core that everybody in web pays attention to right now. But there's still kind of that disconnect between government and like the internet. So yeah, compliance is it's more of like that legal requirement that the industry just isn't quite there yet. So conformance is really what we want to strive for. We want as accessible as possible.
Why are people getting sued if it's not a legal requirement?
So the legal requirement is that websites need to be able to be used by people, like all people, especially the general public. So something like that Domino's example, a person couldn't use that platform. A person couldn't interact with that business, resulting in it starting to feel like discriminatory towards that person. Like, oh, why is this business not catering to me? So like there are some legal requirements, like from the general standpoint. It's just like the deeper technical aspects of it are what are still up for discussion.
So that's leaves us in a really interesting place, right? Because one thing that we talk about as folks who work in the marketing industry we talk about we talk about aside from wanting to reach as many people as possible, there's a compliance case to this. There's a business case to this, right? Especially for folks who serve, especially with a business like the cannabis industry that has roots in medical, that has roots in the plant as medicine. We're reaching people who may have ailments that affect their use of the internet, but this is across the board. What we're seeing here is one of the business use cases that we actually have for accessibility is SEO, right? Because there's a huge intersection between accessibility and search engine optimization. So this is something that we want to focus on whenever we're working on any client's website. It's not just how folks are navigating a website, how they're interacting with the website. That makes it makes a huge difference from an SEO perspective that we're optimizing those features as well. A good example is something called alt image tags, and it's basically a description of a picture that you put on your website. If you have a library of images or put an image in your blog, the alt image text, what it does is it's a description of the image, right? But there's SEO tactics that you apply to that to optimize it and help search engines understand, well, this is content related to X subject. So when I, the crawler, go through this website and figure out where to sort it in the whole bucket of internet content, I know where to put that image. So it's not just as simple as, let's say we took the screenshot of us talking right now, and the screenshot might say, the alt image tags might be, two women are talking about accessibility on a webinar, right? That could be an example of an alt image tag, but we want to optimize that and say, Stella Morrison, founder of Cano Content, Samantha Nardelli, co-owner of Shanty Design, speak about SEO and website accessibility, something that gives a little bit more detail that still provides somebody who may be using a screen reader, for example, with enough information that they know what the image is without having to actually physically see it. But at the same time, it's also providing more information for search engines and leading a benefit to that. So another example of this is the way content is actually structured on your page. So you might, some folks watching might be familiar with the phrase H tags or header tags. So if you see a header at the top of a website, like the big text at the top, right? And there's actually code markup for that instructs crawlers to say, oh, well, this is the tag. That helps. That has an interaction with some of these screen readers and other tools that folks with disabilities might use to access a website. And it has SEO value as well. So those are just two examples. Sam, do you have any other examples that we can kind of throw on here to illustrate this?
Sure. So, I mean, generally speaking, what's good for accessibility is good for SEO overall, because there are some things that are syntax related when it comes to the HTML structure. For example, like adding titles to your links. Or adding descriptive links. For example, if you have a button that just says click here after a paragraph that is maybe a little bit vague, a screen reader or Google might not know what that means, like what click here to go where. So, we use an example of like read more blogs or learn about Cana content. Like if you have those descriptive buttons, it's helpful for the screen reader and it's helpful for Google. And that it also goes for any other sort of like coded elements throughout the page. So like your navigation, knowing that a menu is a navigation rather than just some links like listed on a page. Like the screen reader and Google will know like, oh, this is the main menu. We need to pay attention to this. And then even like ordered lists, unordered lists. So if you have something in your listing, like, hey, we have 3 steps, step 1, 2, and 3, and you want them numbered, Google knows that it needs to go in an order versus say an unordered list where you're just listing, I don't know, like menu items or something like that. So when it comes to the syntax and just the structure of the back end and how everything is coded, that is beneficial for those screen readers, and Google will also follow them.
This is what I mean when I tell folks that there are more than 200 factors that go into SEO by most estimates, right? It's not just put up a website and hope everybody comes and hope the milkshake brings all the boys to the yard, right? To be a millennial here, but that's not how this works. There's so many intricate details that interlap with so many other elements of marketing, of web design, of website development that all need to be taken into account, because even if a few of those are off, that could be a make or break difference. So from an SEO perspective, this is accessibility, something we pay attention to, but it's also really a human element as well, that the importance of making sure that anybody, whoever they are, can interact with your content. So that being said, there's, as you mentioned before, there aren't magic permanent standards that everybody can go and say, well, check, and we're done. That's not how this works. But we can show that you are striving to get there. So how would you recommend that somebody looks and tries to get an idea of what their accessibility status is right now? And let's start there, and then we could talk a little bit about, well, how do you get to the next level?
Sure. Yeah, there are definitely some like base standards that anyone can address on their own too. And if we need to screen share, I have some examples of what some non-accessible pieces of a website are versus what some accessible pieces are. So the first thing that I usually will talk about is like your image, your color contrast ratio. So like on here, this is just like a tester page with a bunch of different things. You want your text to be readable. And so this part is a little bit less Google oriented and more focused on like someone who's actually going to be viewing the web page. And we use some checkers that are add-ons for like Chrome extensions. And I think we can get a list of these like Chrome extensions to everybody on the call too. So the first one that I like to use is Stark. And when we're talking about color contrast, this is like the first thing I do when I'm auditing a website for accessibility is you can click the contrast and it gives you some guides here for ratios. There are a few different types of ratios to look at. And this is where I'm saying is like everything with accessibility is kind of a spectrum. And it's not exactly 100% concrete. So for WCAG, the ratio guidelines, you'll see down here, there's like, level AA and then level AAA. So right now the standard is AA, but I think eventually we're probably going to move to AAA being that main standard. So this is basically saying that your normal text on a website needs to have a ratio, contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 for normal text. And then for larger text, it's 3 to 1 because, the larger the text gets, the more like the easier it is for someone to read it. So when you use this add-on, you can actually just hover over different sections of your website. And I see a lot of websites use this. Like some people don't like that like stark black or a really dark color in their paragraph text. So they opt for like a gray or something a little bit softer. But you really have to pay attention to just that contrast ratio, because you can see that these two colors together, they don't pass the normal text for AA or AAA. Sure, you might be able to get away with it with larger text like this. I think right now I'm using 16 or 18 point on this particular font. So if this was like a 25 point font or like a header font, you might be able to get away with it. But like, why risk it? So a lot of the times we'll find, and like what's nice about this checker is you can adjust the colors a little bit too, but we'll try to find what that accessible body text is. Even something in here, what's nice about this is it'll give you suggestions. So it'll say like, hey, if we this gray on top of this white, if we want this gray to be a little bit darker, maybe something around here is accessible. So if we were to change this text to still not like a stark black, but like a darker gray, that at least passes, and you can get that softer feel from the visual standpoint. And check the base boxes of color contrast.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing here is you don't have to give up your brand identity to be accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Excellent. You mentioned something about font sizes earlier. Is there a minimum size font that's recommended for accessibility?
There is, and it's kind of ever changing. Like I think last year it might have been 15, and now it's like 16, 18 for paragraph text is the standard. As well as your line height. So this kind of goes with publishing too, like books. So in books, you want your line height to be readable enough. I think it's like 1.3 or something like that when you're reading a physical book. Yeah. For web, the goal for your line height is 1.5 EM. So you want to have enough space in between that each line is digestible. The closer your text is together, even if you're trying to like fit it into a design space and like you're crunching it together, you really got to think about that readability. Yep. And that's a good example of something that is beneficial for everyone who's looking at a website, not just from an accessibility standpoint. Like it really is better for everyone using it.
Can you explain what line height is really quick, just for people who might not be designers watching?
Sure. So it's the space between the two lines. So like this top line and then this bottom line, there's like a gap in between here. And sometimes people, especially on websites, I see people shrink it, like make it really tight because they want it to fit into a certain space. But as text starts to get closer together, people get lost when they're reading. They're like, oh, wait, what line am I on? So it gives a clear distinction between what sections you're reading.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there other elements of the plugin, the extension that you'd just want to play around with and show us?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple different extensions too. For the Stark one, It actually doesn't pick up this one. This one's like a 12-point font size. So, but if your font doesn't follow or your typography doesn't follow guidelines outside of color contrast, you'll get some notices in here. What's also nice about this is you get a vision simulator. So if you want to see what your website looks like, like a little bit blurry, to see if things are actually readable. And even if you simulate this blurred version, you could see that this darker one at least has a chance of being read. Whereas like some of these, you might not even know there's anything on the page. And then there's, like loss of contrast, ghosting. You can kind of see what different people might use their browser as. So like bright light, you can see that that lighter color doesn't show up at all. So let's see. Yeah, there are a couple other ones in there. And then I also use a tool. There's this one here, which is a contrast checker. And this checks all of the color combinations on the website. So not just text, but if you have like an image or like an SVG, like an icon on top of like a background, instead of having to go through and check one by one, you can actually just open up this and see which ones are accessible and which ones aren't. And it'll even tell you like, hey, small, this like pink on black doesn't really work all that well, but large, you can get away with like the pink on white. So this one is pretty nice, and you can adjust the level in here too. So this just gives you like a good overview of like if you're looking at a page and you see all red, you're like, hey, we need to fix that.
Beautiful. So we've got a lot of tools at our disposal, basically, that anybody can access, right? So Stark, this isn't some website, this isn't some web developer secret, right? Anybody can do this and kind of get their idea. And then, most likely, because a lot of folks aren't at this standard, you might find that there are some gaps that you need to be addressing in order to achieve this conformance standard, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, what do you do next, right? Let's say you're using these checkers, and I know there's a couple. We're going to have some resources up after the webinar. We have some resources up, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But are there, what do you do next, right? You did this audit, you did this audit, and then you're at the stage where you got to fix something, right? So what do you do? Who do you call? Who's responsible for this? What are the next steps?
Let's see. So, I mean, you can definitely talk to an accessibility expert. You can talk to a web developer. You can run some accessibility audits on your own to just kind of see where you are. And I want to backtrack a little bit because there are like two more sections on this particular page that I have that are kind of easy fixes that are also important. One is the forms. So your forms, you want to make sure that like forms are one of the big things. If someone can't fill out a form, then that's a problem. So a lot of the times in design, you'll see a lot of people not have like titles. Maybe they put their text inside a placeholder. If you're looking at the code of this, it's actually the screen readers are going to have a hard time reading this. So the proper way that you want to use a form, you can also see it has like the required fields in here. They should always have labels on them so that you can use those screen readers.
And go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. I was going to say, and then like the next thing is like an audit. Like we use a checker, a plugin that is an accessibility checker by Equalize Digital. And they have a fantastic plugin that'll actually scan WordPress websites and it'll give you a score. So getting 100 is not always, the goal. That's where it's like conformance versus compliance, but it'll give you a full checklist of all your open issues. And then you can go through one by one to address them. So that's a really good way to just take a website to the next level and actually work towards accessibility.
Beautiful. And you know what? There actually aren't a lot of, this isn't the fixes that you're mentioning here are not super complicated. This is something that doesn't require rebuilding your whole website. This doesn't require starting from the beginning and completely redoing everything you've done. These are things that could be, assuming that the website is sound on a foundation to begin with, you can very easily make these updates. It's not so complicated to go in and make those efforts to show that you are trying to achieve this level of conformance. So one other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit with accessibility conformance is the use of some plugins, because there's a lot of things that you can do with design development from an SEO perspective, but there are some things that just don't go in the code, right? That you can't really necessarily make happen. So we will recommend in a lot of cases, the use of a plugin as that's complementary to this. I want to be very clear that a plugin is not meant to replace or to stand in for your obligations to the public. It is meant to be another measure on top of what you're already doing. So on top of the SEO efforts that you're putting in to structure your content correctly, alt image tags that we discussed, on top of working to do things like work on contrast of text and images and make sure that forms are accessible, we recommend this plugin to really go to the next level for a lot of sites. And that just, it adds another level of demonstrating conformance. And we have some recommendations for folks. The conformance standard, you're able to at least get a little bit closer and make those demonstrations, but it's not as simple as you just install the plugin and walk away. There are other elements that you want to be a part of this, right? So, at this point, I want to talk a little bit more about, just conclude with some tips and tricks. I want to conclude with just a little bit more information, what people can do next. We talked a little bit about the form, Sam. Anything else for conformance that you think is worthwhile for people to walk away from and for them to know? We're going to have the resources for Equalize Digital. We'll have the resources for the plugin we use, Accessibility. We'll have this all on the replay, and you'll see this webinar used a couple of times throughout the next couple of weeks to your Canon Contents pages. But want to basically give you the last area here to talk a little bit about what you can do, if you need to have like a legal resource, if you need to do any of this, like what are the next steps for somebody?
Yeah, I mean, definitely get an audit. I believe they can get an audit through Canna Content too, just to see where they stand. And then there are, like I said, we use Equalize Digital is a really good resource to just read up on it. They're really on top of the legal side and what the laws are actually saying and what changes. So, maybe flipping around through there, or an audit is really like the next best step to make sure that you're compliant. And then if you do end up needing in conformance, and if you are needing legal help, then I think there are plenty of resources out there on who you can find that can defend you if something does happen.
There we go. I got to press the right button. So it's Friday, everyone. So when it comes to, you mentioned something really important, and I want to make people aware that there are predatory folks who might see, if legal action is taken against you, you might find yourself with a lot of phone calls from attorneys, or a lot of folks, a lot of calls from marketing or web design folks who say, hey, I could fix you and get you up to standard. Be wary of that. These are folks looking for a business opportunity. Work with the people who you're already working with and see what they can do, right? So it's a matter of not just running toward what the first solution is. It's about doing it right. And the best thing that you can do is get in front of this as best as possible. One recommendation is you might want to consider, as part of conformance, what's called an accessibility, basically put an accessibility statement on your website. It's similar to a privacy policy or any disclosures about how data is being used on a website. What the accessibility statement does is it helps demonstrate your conformance by saying, this is what we're doing, and if you're finding issues, basically contact us. That's something that you can get templates from a source like Equalize Digital, but we recommend in the cannabis industry specifically to speak with your legal counsel to get this. This is something that you want to make sure you're covered in all bases, and that your legal counsel is aware of what's going on and can make the best decisions for your situation. So that's another thing that you can add on, and that's not going to take too much it's not going to take too much effort, but you have to follow through, right? Can't just put up the statement, can't just put up the plugin and walk away. You have to continue striving for this accessibility standard. But the best part about that is there's business value to it, and there's SEO value to it, and there's just a general ethical humanity level to it of making sure that anybody, as many people as possible, are able to access your content and eventually do business with you. So Sam, I want to give you just a last minute, last words of anything else you want to share. And thank you so much for taking the time today. And let's send this off. It's Friday again. Send this off.
Yeah, no, thank you again for having me. And I mean, I think the real big takeaway is like striving for like don't go for perfection, because it is a spectrum. There are going to be a lot of technical things. We only touched on just like a few of the front end pieces, but if anyone does end up looking at that WCAG list, I mean, there's a lot that's in there. So, it is like a work in progress. It is something that you kind of want to keep up with if you are going to prioritize accessibility. Like Stella said, it's not a, plug it and you're done, but, you have to keep up on it. Especially with WordPress, because like plugins update and you need to keep an eye on like the tech. So having things like those checkers on there that you can run a report every month or however often you want, updating your accessibility statement, noting like the dates that you update your accessibility statement, show that you care about this for your website. And yeah.
Is there that brought a question to mind? Is there a recommendation for how often you should be revisiting something like this, or just how often should you be revisiting an accessibility statement?
So it really depends on how active your website is. If it's one that's updated pretty regularly, it has active SEO on it, you're constantly updating content or blogs, then I would definitely say monthly at the minimum. And then you don't have to update the statement monthly. It's just as new things come up. But definitely running it at least like quarterly, maybe every 2 or 3 months. Again, just depending on how active your website is. If it's pretty static and you don't have a lot of updates going on, there's not likely to be that many changes to the content on the site. But it will also depend on the plugins that you have on the site too and how often they update. But I think like a good rule of thumb is just to be safe monthly.
Great. So from that point of view, if you are a dispensary and you have a menu that's frequently being updated, and accessibility for menus and cannabis specifically are a different conversation that we did not have time to get into today, that might be something you want to update more often. But if you're a B2B website, just kind of throwing a page up whenever you got a new product or service, you might not have to look at it as often. So I think that might be the takeaway here is direct to consumer websites, any website where anyone can shop or order something across the board, any industry, I think would be probably a priority to focus on top of this. So again, thank you, Sam, so much for joining us. It's a pleasure as always to see you, work with you, and have you as part of our family here. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great weekend, everybody. And feel free to drop some comments and reach out to either one of us. Our websites have been crawling up there for a few minutes. We're happy to continue answering questions. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.